Okay, we are now live. We are now live.
Okay, huzzah.
Oh
Okay,
my gosh.
this is so Facebook is so terrible. So apparently only a limited number of people could see it, but now we're actually live. And so yes, so we're gonna
We
start
are
over.
very sorry.
We are
It's this is the longest delay we've ever had. And you know what? We were celebrating at 7 because we stupidly thought we had it right.
or at 2 or at whatever time it is.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm not England time. At 2, we were celebrating. That was dumb. But here we are at 2:20. So welcome.
It's so yeah, Facebook changes this every time on us. So this we have to do them daily so that Facebook doesn't have time
It's
to
not
change it
us.
up
It's
in
not
between.
us. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm Farah.
I'm Jill. Thank you for watching our Facebook Live and sticking with us.
We're Simplify Homeschool,
Yeah.
www.simplifythenumber4you.com. You can find us always in this group, College Confident Homeschoolers. We're going to talk about paying for college. And I'm doing this whole intro again. And so one of the reasons we wanted to talk about this is that there's a lot of misconceptions out there. So, yeah, tons. People often think that they know how paying for college works and what the real costs are going to be and how they're going to get the best deal. And sometimes they're really wrong. And they take advice from other people. They don't realize how much like your individual finances play into this and how much that impacts how much you're going to have to pay. And a lot of the time,
Right.
Jill, you were saying that people she's it's there. We're just going to assume it's there. If it's not, we're recording it for later.
It is there. It's there.
Okay.
It's there. It's there. It is there.
So, okay. So, that sometimes people think it's going to be more expensive than it's going to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or that community
and it's not
college.
Always that case.
No, not always. It depends on your finances. Or they think that community college is like the one way to save money. And sometimes it's actually more expensive.
Or sometimes you don't get as much money when the student transfers, so then it does become more expensive. So there's a lot that plays into it. Yeah.
So the total cost over 4 years might be more expensive overall for the degree. And community college statistically ends up taking students longer. Now, if a student needs to start at community college because they need to be close to home, because there's a health challenge or a mental health challenge or disability support that you need, that's different. Because then maybe it's going to take the time it's going to take to get that degree anyway. And that's different. But, it just statistically speaking, your kid is more likely to take 5 or 6 years at least, if not just never finish their degree if they start that way.
And I came to a realization the other day when someone asked about transferring in our group.
Oh, yeah.
All 3 of my kids are transfer kids. I don't know why, but they all ended up transferring. One thing that can happen is even if they get through community college fairly quickly, all those credits may not transfer. And so they may not be done at the 4-year in 2 years, and maybe 3 or 4.
Right.
So just be aware of that too. Okay, so we're going to start with our different perspectives.
Different experiences. Okay. So should I start again? Because
Start again. Yeah.
So we have really different experiences. Because I'm married and I have 2 kids, and I live in a house that I own that has appreciated a lot in value since I bought it. So it has a lot of equity in it, even though we didn't buy it at that price point and couldn't afford it now. And my husband makes a decent salary, and I make some money too. And so we are by most definitions middle class, but we still qualified for need-based aid. And we would not have known how much that was without doing net price calculators. So, a few years before our kids were ready to look at college, and only one of my kids chose to go to college, got one not going to college at all. We started filling out net price calculators. They do ask about your property and your, all these kinds of things. Different ones ask different things because different colleges are taking different elements into account. And I saw a price point there that was something that was a lot, but something that we could potentially, between drawing a little bit out of the small amount of money in 529s that grandparents had given some money to over the years, and cash flowing the amount that we could pay for with a bit of a stretch if our kids also took out loans. And so that's indeed the price point that we ended up with. And so it was, with some variation within that. And so my kid is at a private, small liberal arts college with a very high sticker price. Okay. But we are not paying that price. We're paying significantly less. And that's with a combination of what you would call merit aid and need-based aid that brought it down almost precisely to our EFC, SAI, amount that it said that we should pay. So I think that's an important thing to understand. I had to game that out and look at different schools in order to get those types of prices. Okay. Okay. So Jill, what was your experience? Really different.
Okay, my experience is extremely different.
Yeah.
Which is okay. Not married, so divorced, which makes everything more complicated when you're divorced because there's the other parent that's involved or not involved, and that really influences things. I had 3 kids, 2 were twins, and another one a few years behind. So 2 going at the same time, that affected it. Lower income because it was truly just me supporting the whole family. We did not get support from their father. So we really had to research. I had to really research what type of schools would give aid so that my kids could afford to go to college. And because we were low income, I was thinking community college for a while for all of them because I thought, well, we were in California, community college you can afford. It's free really if you're low income. So I was going to do that, but then I started realizing that there was other options out there, and my kids got lucky with QuestBridge. So QuestBridge is, and I post about that a lot in this group, is a scholarship program for low income students who are academic. And so you have to be kind of high academic and someone posted this question, like if you're low income, is it just these tippy top schools that are going to be the most affordable? And sometimes it is, or like the tier down, but there's a few schools even a tier down from that give really good need-based aid. But we were definitely looking for need-based aid. One thing that plays into that is that a lot of these schools, you have to fill out the CSS profile, which is quite difficult if you are divorced parents or if your parents weren't married, because you have to have the other parent's information on the CSS profile, or you have to get a waiver as a student. And when you're the student, you have to get a waiver. You have to ask someone to write a letter for you. And you have to share some really personal details that can sometimes be difficult. So I just want to make families aware of that. If the other parent is involved in the student's life and pays support, you cannot get a waiver. No school is going to get a waiver for that. So just be aware that can also play into if you're divorced. So you do at a lot of these schools, if they're CSS profile schools, have to report both parents and their income. But it was a journey for us. It was actually quite difficult in some ways, which I'll talk about further. But we targeted really different schools from you.
I think one of the things to realize too is that, for low income families, the options vary from state to state, so
Yep.
like you were homeschooling your kids in California, or your older 2 anyway. And so, statewide, there were a lot of public school options as well that also could have been affordable potentially.
But especially the ones near home. So
yeah,
we lived 5 minutes from UC Irvine, and by living at home, my students the twins could have gone there very affordable. I mean, it's just completely affordable. The ones that are further afield is when you start adding in housing and food,
housing
that
costs
just kills low income families sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, and in some states, they really do a lot for low income students in terms of public universities. So then those can be a relatively affordable option, especially for tuition. I mean, a lot of places, if you're low income in some states, can be tuition free. But then it still can be room and board that makes it more expensive. But in some states with lower cost of living, it may not break the bank. It just depends. Like North Carolina is really good with low income families as well. I mean, a bunch of states are. But then some states are terrible with their public universities, and they just don't give a lot of aid. And most states don't give aid for public universities for out-of-state students. Now, it's not every school, and there are definitely some smaller grants available, especially at schools that are trying to lure out-of-state students because they pay at a higher rate. So like some schools, they definitely are interested in giving those prices. But like need-based aid in general at public universities out of state is just not available. And so you're paying a really high cost to attend to those schools unless it's an
Unless your
unusual
student,
situation or
or your student will qualify for a merit scholarship or something based on
right.
high stats, but that's not need-based aid. That's
And
different.
even at some of these schools, though, they don't give, it doesn't, even those biggest merit awards don't really offset the amount that, the cost of like an in-state university. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In-state public.
I know that when, I think you remember this, but when my youngest applied to schools, we were then living in Virginia. And he did not have options. He was getting into state schools, and we couldn't afford them. I mean, we just couldn't afford them. And I was so shocked because I don't know if it was during COVID. I mean, I know I do this for a living, but I hadn't researched too well the cost of in-state schools in Virginia because I came from California and I assumed we'd have options. I just assumed it.
Right.
And we didn't. He did not get into UVA. That one would have probably been a really good one because UVA is good with aid. As we know now, he's transferring to UVA and he's starting already this summer. He's starting summer school and he's gotten complete aid there, need-based aid, and we can afford it, which is wonderful. But at the time when he applied as a first year, all the schools he got into Virginia we couldn't afford it. And so when he ended up going to Colorado College, they met full need. And that was just like, it was the one school he got in that met full need and he had to go there. It wasn't even a choice. It was that or community college.
Right. Yeah. I think, if we had targeted, these higher up schools like that, my kid probably, there's a higher chance that he wouldn't have been able to afford it. And we also looked at some schools that were, that give really high merit aid to a lot of students. And he got into a couple and we couldn't afford those that were private schools because it wasn't enough to bring it down to our cost, according to our estimated financial contribution. And so, which was close to what we could actually do. So I think again, you're kind of playing around with these things and trying to figure it out. Okay, so what are the questions on the group?
Okay.
And folks can add other questions and ask things, I think.
And you can add them anywhere. I posted like 100
we
different
posted
places,
in so many places.
I'm checking everywhere, and I think people are messaging me, so I'll try to get to those. Okay. Advice for those who will not qualify for any need-based aid, but have kids who are interested in their large state institutions, as well as some out-of-state colleges, both private and public. So they will not qualify for any need-based aid. So how do you know what to target?
I mean, then you're looking for merit aid. But I would say the first step on that is be sure that's the case. Fill out net price calculators.
Because no one ever knows for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, some people really do know, but a lot of times people are surprised.
Yeah, I have seen a lot of people be very surprised. A lot of families who think like, well, we're just not going to qualify for anything or just a tiny bit. And they qualify for a lot, actually. Like they qualify for, tens of thousands of dollars of aid at a private meets needs school, and other families who are like, well, I'm sure we qualify for some, and they qualify for nothing. Like their EFCs are like $90,000 or $100,000 a year, which basically means like you don't qualify for anything.
Yeah.
So always check.
You just want that information because then you know what you're working with. If you don't have it, you don't know and you're not sure what to target.
Yeah.
Yeah. In this case, you're really going after merit scholarships.
Yeah. So if
there are schools that do that.
Yeah.
How do you find those schools?
So you can look up, many schools, especially the schools that are interested in your student, post it straight out on their websites. They will list the specific awards. Sometimes they're called scholarships. They're not called merit aid. It's called like the Presidential Scholarship, the Provost Scholarship, the Dean's Scholarship. Sometimes it's named after famous alumni or so, so or the town it's in. Like, I mean, you get all these ones and there are all these different tiers, and each one is like a different amount. And you can see what is that top award and see, will your student head for that and look for that. So that's what you're looking for. That's the first thing. Okay. The
Yeah.
next thing you can do is, for the colleges that your student is looking for, you can search what is their average amount of non-need based aid to students. What's the average award? And also, what percentage of students are receiving non-need based students are receiving money and awards. So like,
Yeah.
maybe the average amount of an award is $50,000 at a very expensive private school. That's amazing. That's a ton of money. But maybe the percentage of students receiving that money is 5%. So there's great if you are so far above their stats that you can compete for a small number of big awards, then sure. But more common is where you'll see that 50%, 70%, 98% of students who are not need-based are receiving some sort of merit aid, and that the average award is, maybe it's $5,000, maybe it's $50,000.
Yeah, maybe it's 25.
Yeah, 25 is pretty common. 25, 30 is pretty common. And so at private universities anyway. Yeah.
So that's what you're looking for.
Mhm.
Some of these out-of-state publics do give deals to students, but you have to know which ones. Just want to mention, in case anyone doesn't know, there's the Western Undergraduate Exchange, which is really good for students who are in those states that qualify for. It's not in-state tuition, but it is a discounted tuition at the other states. So that's something to look into.
You can also look for schools that participate in Flagship Match. So that is a program where some schools, like, if you qualify for that program, so sometimes there's a bit of merit involved. Other times it's just straight out. Like, if you get in, then you can qualify for that, where you can pay not more than the cost of your state public flagship. So that's probably typically the most expensive public university in your state for tuition. And then, and so that's useful. Like, I think University of Maine has that. So these are other flagships that have this, so that your kid, if they want to go farther away, can participate in that. There are other exchange programs, but between different states for public universities, but they're not as
some of them
broad.
aren't that good.
Yeah, they're not broad like the Western exchange.
No, a lot of them have limited degrees, and some of the schools aren't participating in it anymore. So it just depends. You got to do a little research there.
I mean, if it is the case, if it is the case that your kid is looking at a degree, that's particularly maybe something newer or something that's a little bit more niche, and you're not finding it at your state publics, then look and see if that is available. That's when it is. If your kid, on the other hand, wants to major in computer science or engineering or game design or English or history, like those programs don't tend to be available at most of these exchange programs outside of that Western exchange, the WUE.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to keep going.
Yeah, do it.
Okay, college is super expensive. We won't qualify for need-based aid, but there's no way we can pay $40,000 to $60,000 per year out of pocket. What options if your school doesn't offer much aid? Well, we kind of answered that.
Yeah,
there are a lot of options. But check if that's truly the case.
I would say too, if cost is your number one sort of question, then start with that and look at those schools and compare them. Don't start with universities that your kid can't go to, because you're just never going to pay for it. Like, so if cost is your number one, and in those terms, and you don't qualify for aid, then don't have your kid look at a university that is going to cost even with a lot of aid, like $30,000 or $40,000 a year, if you're not willing to pay that. Start with schools that for example, give automatic free tuition rides if you get a certain SAT score, or things like that.
The thing I tell families when we work with college lists is that, I mean, teens really need to build their list, right? It's important that they take ownership of that, but it always should start with parents figuring out what they can afford and the type of schools they can target, because nothing is more heartbreaking than a teen getting into their dream school and then they can't afford it. And that's the reason they don't go. It's better to just take it off right away from the get go. So they're not even dreaming about it, because they can then fall in love with some other schools that they know they can afford. You should run net price calculators at all these schools that your kid is interested in. So you know right away if you can afford them or not. Another thing to do is, oh, I just lost my thought. It's late here. It's late here.
I
I have a
I was
book
gonna
club
say,
after this.
I was gonna say too, don't let that if there's some schools that you can't afford if your child gets the highest level of merit award or or something like that, then that's one thing. But you got to talk about that carefully with your student, like that this is a reach financially, even if it's not a reach for them to get in.
Right.
And so I
I
think that's an
remember
important.
that's really important too. And sometimes you can know but ahead of time though, based on the SAT score and that.
Yeah,
So that
sometimes.
sometimes. I know what I was gonna say. We have families come to us and they're like, well, if they get in, my kid's willing to take out $40,000 in loans, or my kid's willing to take out 60,000. And the parents don't know this and they need to know this. Your student can't take out that much in loans. There's a cap on how much students can take out in loans. So
Yeah,
you can't be like, oh, they're happy to take out 40,000 a year to pay for this education. Don't let
right.
them do that. I mean, and they
No.
can. And if they do, it's private loans, and you don't want to saddle anyone with private loans at all.
Yeah.
So just be aware of that. Just be aware
And
of that.
and I would say too, parents also, I mean, parents can take out tons of
Yep.
loans, but you probably shouldn't. Just you just
Just to
probably
say, we're
shouldn't.
not financial advisors or anything. We forgot to say that. We're not financial advisors. We're just throwing things out there. But that's a really good point. You
No, I mean
probably
it.
shouldn't.
Yeah, like I don't know what other, and sometimes particularly I would caution families about these plus loans,
Parent plus loans. Yeah.
parent plus loans. Just be very careful around those. The terms are not in your favor. They're not great. Typically, if you are going to take out money, like a home equity loan or something is usually better terms for you long term. But again, we're not financial advisors. We don't know what your situation is. This is a reason to hire someone who can look at your finances and go through it with you and figure out how much can you cash flow, what's the right way to go about planning this.
Especially if you
So
have a complicated financial situation.
yeah, like if you own a business, or
Second home.
second homes really ding you in
Mm-hmm.
at schools, including with the FAFSA. You don't even have to have done the CSS profile for that to really hit you hard. Even if the second
Even if it's
property,
nothing.
yeah, even if the second property is like in a rural
Dirt.
dirt cheap state with like a shack on it, like it can still come back to bite you in the butt.
And we
So
know that for a fact. So
I do. I've seen that.
yeah,
So
yeah,
so yeah, watch out for
yeah.
that
Watch out
in
for that.
particular. Yeah.
Okay, next one.
I
I'm
think,
feeling
but
good
the
about
the
this.
flip side of that though, I would say is your home equity. It can be pretty high. Ours is like we're really lucky that our home equity is really high, because we live in a
Yeah,
neighborhood that gentrified, and that didn't affect us at all. Nor did the money in the 529s. So again, the money that we had in 529s was not enough to pay for college, like straight out of pocket, but it was enough to offset it a bit, and it didn't impact our cost. So
yeah. Which I wouldn't have known about. Like, I don't know any of that because, again, like I didn't own a home. We didn't own a home. We had no 529s or anything. So just different situations. Okay,
yeah.
next question. Non-lottery schools that meet need or close to it, do they exist? I'm wondering if low-income families have real options or if it's basically just your public university or Harvard. And the concept of target schools is really only for people with money. This is very hard. This is very so the twins had target schools because of the UCs. They did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And California is just different, especially UC Irvine being right there. it was just different, but they could drive to UCLA and, you know,
Mhm.
maybe take out a loan the first year just to live on a campus and then live at home. And, you know, so there's that.
Mhm.
California's fine. Virginia, we had a real trouble finding target schools for my son that we could afford that he could get into. Now, does it have to be Harvard? No. There's a ton of schools below that, the next tier down. If you go to Questbridge, even if your student doesn't apply to Questbridge, but if you look at Questbridge schools, a lot of those are not as, I mean, they're still reaches a lot of times, but they're not lottery.
Yeah.
And those are a lot of good schools you can apply to. There's some others too that are not as difficult to get into that are starting to give more and more aid. You can look up, you can look that up. You can find that information online, do net price calculators, everything you need to do.
Yeah.
But I do think being just like, you know, sometimes for middle class families where it shows that they can pay everything, but they truly can't, that kind of puts you in a bind sometimes. It can be hard for lower income families and the students. It really can. I would say a lot of times you can apply to these colleges free. If you're low income, you can get a waiver and not pay for visa. Apply widely.
Yep.
Apply widely as a low income student.
I think also, like, there are, you know, 30, 40, 50% acceptance schools that meet need. You know, so like, and some of them, they meet need under certain circumstances. Like I know my son's college clerk, they meet need, but only if you apply early decision. So it's binding, you know, so sometimes there are these things like that. And ED can be a boost for if you're low income, like, but you have to be really careful about it. But some schools will give you a financial pre-read. You know, so
also if
that
you're
can help.
ED and you're low income and you don't get numbers that your family can truly afford, you can back out of it.
You can back out of it.
Yeah. All my kids applied ED. Well, no, both my boys did.
Or Questbridge. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's I think that's
really
important
helpful
to note.
as a low income family. It is really, really helpful.
Yeah.
Gosh, it's hard.
Which
it is
ED,
hard.
if people think of ED as being for rich families, which unfortunately it is also, because they can get locked into a price that they can't see ahead of time. Which we couldn't use ED. And
no, you couldn't do that.
No. And so, you know, that is something that if you're truly low income, and then you should consider using it. Because
I highly recommend it.
Especially at a school that will be a little bit closer to a target. Because the other thing to understand about this is that, you know, these tippy tops like Harvard, they're also need blind. Okay, so do they have a guess about your students' financial need? Yes, but they're not using that in deciding on whether or not to admit them. Whereas a lot of the schools that do have more like a 30% acceptance that also meet full need are not need blind. They're considering that as they decide. And so some of these schools just simply do not admit that many students who have full need. And so they're just, you know, they turn them away at a higher rate. So maybe their admit rate overall looks more friendly, you know, like, oh, I think my student could get into this school. But then you're not taking into account that they've only got X number of slots for students who have, you know, high need. And so they're only admitting the students whose aid they feel they can fund. And they're not willing to fund full aid for everyone that they're willing.
I would also say, I also just want to jump in here and say that having students take out the federal loans is not the worst thing in the world. It really isn't. It's a small amount. You can graduate with that and still pay it off fairly quickly. That's why they don't let students take out too much. You know, they don't want to saddle you with a bunch. So if your student gets into one of these colleges that they really want to go to and they've included those loans, you know, don't say no right away.
No, don't.
My kids all have a small loan, all three of them.
My college kid has the loans too. I mean, because we couldn't afford to do that. And, you know, we have enough money that hopefully we'll be able to help him pay those. I was lucky enough, I was low income and was lucky enough to go to a meets needs school back in the day. And my father paid my loans afterwards, after the fact. He helped me pay those off. when he had a little bit more money than he did when I was in college. Um, so you can help if that's part of your goal, but if you can't, that's okay too. Like,
Yeah.
that's why it's a small amount in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can take into consideration too what profession your kid is going into.
Yeah.
So like if they're going into a like into business or engineering or something, and you're pretty confident that they're going to make a pretty good salary, or even if you just you know them and they're just such a go-getter, and they just always have a job, like then once they have that degree, you can sort of say, okay, even though it's in arts management, and I feel pretty
Music.
confident. Yeah. um, so you can take that into account versus like, oh, my kid who is such a daydreamer and cannot keep track of things. Like you can take that into, even though they're getting an engineering degree, like, so you can take into account those, like which of your kids can handle those loans and who can't.
I would also say
If you're
too,
able.
though, I would also say too, though, don't discount that 4-year experience
Mhm.
for all students, but really, I think in a lot of ways for low income students, it can really change them. My youngest son, now his loans were so low, he's only had to take out 2,000 for each year. Most of that was travel, getting back and forth and stuff. And now he's going to Virginia and he won't have to take out loans. But the experience he's had at Colorado and that he's been able to study abroad twice has been life changing. And I'm so glad he had that opportunity as opposed to going to 2 years at community college, which I'm not against community college. I went to community college before I transferred. And my daughter also went the community college route. But the 4-year experience, if it's just the little loans, I just back that 100%. I think it can be life changing for some students.
One of the things that I hear sometimes from people who are like against the 4-year experience on some level is they're like, well, we're not interested in paying for, you know, the fun
Yeah.
experience of blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, but you're not just paying for that. You're paying for the type of experience where your student gets in touch with an alumni network and gets mentors and does research and studies abroad and gets internships and just gets, and also has a structured move away from home experience that is like,
Yeah.
it's just a little bit more, encouraging to them and to independence for certain types of, especially, I think for most students, but some
Yeah.
students, I think, need it more than others.
Yeah.
And I think all of those things, and at a price point that is often just not that much more than what you would pay, or sometimes less than what you would pay for community college. And so I think it's worth it. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely do. Okay, someone asked about chasing merit for out of state colleges. I think we covered that.
Yeah.
Um, Can you touch on the concept of scholarship displacement,
Oh, yeah.
which I think is really important? A lot of families don't know about that.
It's been outlawed in a few states now, but it only applies to public universities in those states, as far as I
Right.
know. Unless there's maybe, I haven't followed this too closely, but particularly at private universities, they decide how much you can pay, and then they want that money from you. And if you bring in additional scholarships,
Yeah.
they'll just displace the merit aid they gave your kid, or the grants that they gave your kid. And so you're not
So,
better off.
And scholarships, outside scholarships take a lot of time.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of writing often, and you need to apply to a ton to get any sort of payback often. We often say it's not worth it, really.
I don't think, I mean, there's certain cases where it can be worth it. Like, there are a few big, full tuition or full ride scholarship, outside scholarships for low income
Yeah.
students, and those can be worth it. So that's one possibility. Those don't exist as readily for full pay students.
Right.
If you're in a state where where you're full pay anyway, you're not going to get any aid, and your student is going to go to a regional, local, public university, and your tuition is relatively low, then they might be able to get a couple of, $1,500, $2,000 scholarships that pay for a significant amount of tuition. Um, and, and so then it might be worth it because then there's no displacement involved and it is paying a significant portion. For these big private schools, it just, $1,000, $1,500, like you just, oh my gosh, it's just nothing. Like, what's the
Yeah.
point of this?
Yeah.
Especially if
Yeah.
it's going to displace, it's not making a big difference. And your kid maybe
Yeah.
had to apply to 20 scholarships to get that. Every single one was a different essay. Every single one was a ton of time. They could have gotten a job and made that much money, like in the amount of time that
Yeah.
that took. And then they would have known they were going to make the money.
Okay, so that just reminded me of something I want to jump in real quick, and it's the
Okay.
work study. Okay, so a lot of times as
Mm,
part of the financial aid package, you get
yeah.
a work study. If you're lower income and your student is really counting on that, it's not always easy to get at all, especially for the amount of money that they're saying you're going to get for it.
Yeah.
That's the first thing I think you should be aware of. And just in general, as a lower income family, when you look at the costs, they'll have costs for books, they'll have costs for travel, a lot of time built into it. I always just out and because we couldn't afford that and just see what the total cost is. Health insurance was one that was really difficult for my students. They want proof that you have health insurance, and if you don't, you have to pay for it for the state, the school if you're out of
Mhm.
state.
Yeah.
That can be costly. These are just little things that come up that I think for some families don't matter as much, but if you're low income, it can be quite stressful.
Yeah.
Getting to and from college is very stressful. My son decided to go to school in New York when we lived in California. The cost of getting back and forth was quite a lot. At a lot of these schools, they have a little fund for low income families that if you're really desperate, you can draw into it. You just
Mhm.
have to know that it's there and your student has to take advantage of it. My oldest son took advantage of that a couple of times when he had a real need to help travel and that. So these things are available
Mhm.
to low income families, but you can't always count on it.
I totally agree about the work study. My kid got work study last year. Like that did not, we paid that money into his
Yeah,
tuition. Which
yeah,
it was a bit of I mean, that's another thing to be aware of, especially if you're not like, on full, if you don't have high need, your price may fluctuate from year to year, so you can look at
yeah, yeah,
schools like my son's financial package has changed from year to year. And it was not, I mean, it's okay. But I mean, I did sort of anticipate that we'd pay a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more each year, which is terrible, but that is what it is. So you can anticipate that. Though some places have, like I think all the public schools in Ohio, for example, have tuition lock. And it's not uncommon, especially at smaller regional schools, public schools to have tuition lock. And some private universities have it, though not as many. But you can look for that or a guaranteed tuition price, so that they're raising it, but for the class next and then the class next and so forth. And your
right.
price is locked in.
Yeah,
Um, but not all schools offer that. So that's something to look at. Yeah.
yeah. There's a lot coming into play here.
Yes.
Okay. We have two more questions, I think, that we haven't
Okay.
covered. And then what do you think about taking classes at the expense of school as a non-degree seeking student to see if it's worth it? Do schools tend to let those students in after the fact?
Uh,
Ugh.
I don't,
I
I
think they're
mean,
talking about private, four-year universities. Is it worth it?
no,
Yeah.
I don't, I mean, are we talking about like a summer program maybe or a,
Non-degree seeking student? I don't know. Classes, dual enrollment at a private university? I'm not sure.
I mean, most of the private universities, most of the private four-year universities that do offer like, non-degree seeking students dual enrollment options, um, are schools that your kid could probably get into without this sort of bonus of proving themselves at that school. Like it's not,
Yeah.
and in terms of now there are tippy top schools that offer summer programs.
Right.
A few of the really competitive ones can offer a bit of an edge at that school, but most of the time it's not. It really isn't a pipeline to that school at all.
No.
Most of them are
Yeah.
pay for play. Like, they
Yeah.
might have a little bit of, of an application, but they just want your money. And they don't really give you a sense of what it's like to be in a class at that school. I mean, it just isn't. Now,
And
I
even
would
if you
say
work with a professor there or something, that's not going to always give you
it's
an edge
also,
or anything
yeah,
like
also
that.
not a guarantee. I mean, I
Yeah.
have certainly heard stories of that where a family was like, oh, and my student worked with this professor, and then they apply,
Yeah.
including with a letter from that professor, and does nothing. Like,
Mm.
so it's just not, it's maybe not what you think it's going to be. I mean, I would say too, like, it's not, now, I do think that in person dual enrollment at a 4-year school does maybe look a little better than at a community college, but not so much better. And it depends on the university. Like
And if
I
you're,
wouldn't,
again, if you're low income or something, you can't afford that. It's not going to hurt you to just use
no,
dual enrollment at your community
at your
college. That's
community
fine.
college. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I also wouldn't treat it. I mean, if you can afford it and a school that your kid is interested in is nearby and it happens to offer dual enrollment options and they'd like to try it, like go for it. Like,
Yeah. I
I
think
mean,
there's
that
nothing
is,
wrong.
yeah, that's good, but I
Yeah.
wouldn't look for it specifically. And this sort of phrase like non-degree seeking, like usually doesn't apply to dual enrollment. It usually applies to like community students who are just taking
Right.
classes,
Dropping
and you
in.
can't
Yeah.
do that after you've graduated. It needs to be dual enrollment. Otherwise you can become a transfer student, which is usually not what you want. So yeah.
Just be careful. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
be careful. But don't do it just because you think it might give an edge on college admissions, because that's not the
No,
case usually. So just be aware of that.
no.
Trying it out and having a dual enrollment at a 4-year college can be quite good
Yeah.
if you can afford it and it's an
Mm-hmm.
option near you. Okay. Uh, just going back and forth because we have like so many threads going here.
Uh-huh.
Let's see. Okay. How do need blind colleges identify low income students? Wait,
How did the need? No. It's two separate streams that they're looking at. So the need blind school, there's the people who are reviewing the application, and then afterwards they come in and you get the package. So it's like, okay, here's our class, and they send it off to financial aid, and then financial aid looks at everybody's
yeah.
finances and tells you how much it's going to be. Whereas at a need aware school, the application itself says this is, how much money the student is going to need, or the student's going to need, has high need, low need, and that's part of what they're deciding on. And so that's like a sort of point against the student potentially, or a point for if they're looking to recruit more socioeconomic, low socioeconomic class students. But even within that, it's going to be more competitive typically. So
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Um, I would jump in there and say something, but I was like looking at questions and I'm not quite sure what you said. But I'm sure it's 100% correct and I agree. And that was great for you to talk about that.
thanks, Jill.
Thank you for thank you for doing that.
Okay,
Do you see any more questions anywhere?
I don't know. I think we got them.
I am so done. I have enjoyed this very, very much. We have been at it for quite a while because we did one for like 20
Have you
minutes and then we did another one.
have you enjoyed it? Because have you actually enjoyed it?
Well, hey, my internet didn't go.
Oh,
So
hey.
that's a win. I
That is a
think.
win because the internet in England is terrible. I guess I was thinking that it's just like uncomfortable to talk about money,
It is uncomfortable to talk about money. If you don't know my situation, it's been a journey for my kids and I. We have been on our own for a very long time. But you know what? I like to share it. I like to share our journey because we've worked really hard to get where we're at. And this is one of the reasons that you and I help people with the Quest for a Scholarship for
Yeah.
free. If anyone's low income out there and you need some support, reach out to us. We do work with a couple students every year in that area because it's very close to my heart. If anyone at all is a single parent and has no contact with other parent and needs help filling out the CSS profile waiver, I have a lot of experience with that. And Farrah, you know all about that because you've supported me sometimes, because this last time it was really hard with my youngest, right?
I know.
It was extremely hard for him to talk about it. It upsets me that they even make you do it, but I know there's a reason for it.
The CSS profile is just so, I mean, and it's different at every school. And, you know, like the waiver got denied some places and accepted most places, but
yeah, I won't mention the school that denied it, but I'm still very upset with them.
Yeah.
So
not
a state school.
Yeah.
A state school that people love. Not cool at all. And also that same school would not approve his waiver for applying, which is not great. But I'm always willing to help anyone with that if your student needs some help. There's some little tricks to that if you need help. Okay, next one, our next talk. And I have all these notes because we couldn't, you can't tell. Well, I have tons of different titles because we couldn't figure it out. And I wrote them all down. Okay, it's next month, July 9th. It's at 2:00. Let's throw out 2:20 just in case. It'll be running by 2:20 Eastern Standard Time.
Yeah.
The subject is finding a balance between specialized versus generalized during the high school years, right?
Yeah. Yes. There we go.
During the high school years. Oh, wait, I got to write that down. Do you want to say anything about that?
No, I want to save it.
Okay, so that's going to be our next talk. We promise we'll be here. We will be very frustrated when it first starts, and we will be blaming Facebook once again.
Facebook will have changed it again. I can just guarantee it.
Yeah, it's never us. We know what we're doing every time.
No, it's never us. It's just like our clients who, you know, it wasn't them. It was Harvard. No, I don't.
It wasn't them. It was Harvard. That's going to be our new tagline. Okay, so we will be here in a month. Until then, you can find us on Instagram. We're on Instagram. We have a lot of stuff there. We're at YouTube. We're in this group, obviously, and we have a Facebook page, and then we have our website. Wow. Yeah. We just need TikTok, and then we'd be done.
You tried to start one, but we haven't really done anything with it.
No, I don't like it. Okay, I'll see you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.